As you'll remember, Professor John Cooper questioned Thomas Cashman as part of the defence. Now it's time for David McLaughlin to begin his cross-examination for the prosecution. David says, "When did you find out a little girl had been shot?" "I found out the day after," says Thomas Cashman. "What time?" says David. "I'm not sure," says Thomas Cashman. "Try," says David. "I'm not sure," says Thomas Cashman. "It was big news in Dovecot," said David. "I'm not sure, the day later," says Cashman. "Morning or afternoon?" said David. "It would have been in the morning," says Cashman. "It happened on your patch, where you live, where you sell drugs," says David. "Where I sell drugs," says Thomas Cashman. "Because you're a criminal," says David. "Because I'm a drug dealer," says Thomas Cashman. Don't forget, Thomas Cashman said that he made thousands per week. David says this would amount to hundreds of thousands per year. Thomas Cashman says, "That's what I was making, yeah. I was selling cannabis on a high level." "And you go to Runcorn for a holiday?" says David. "It's my own flat," says Thomas Cashman. "Was it a romantic getaway?" says David. "No, it was just to go to the flat and have a chill out," says Thomas Cashman. "Mr. Wynne was there as well," says David. "Not at the time," says Thomas Cashman. David then moves on to the witness who can't be named. He says, in your words, you were getting stitched up. "I'm getting stitched up for a murder of a child I didn't commit," says Thomas Cashman. David then asks why the witness wanted to stitch him up. Thomas Cashman says, "Loads of reasons, not just the one." "Is it the case on this night you went somewhere to someone who you thought you could trust?" says David. "The CCTV covers every single angle of her house. They would have got caught on CCTV. Of all the CCTV yous have took, there's nobody going to her house because no one went to her house. I never went to her house. I would have been caught on CCTV. The prosecution's case is a subject yous believe has garden hopped over. If that was the case, they'd be seen on the cameras to the right and to the left. I'm not a magician. I can't disappear and go somewhere. No one has gone to her house. Check all the cameras. Yous haven't seen nobody go to her house because she's a liar. Nobody's gone to her house," says Thomas Cashman. He continues to say, "If you're saying someone's garden hopped over here, which I definitely have not, it wasn't me. I can comment where I was at the time. I went to my mate's house." David then asked Thomas Cashman if he cut his chest and bled onto a t-shirt. Thomas Cashman says he had a little spot on his chest. He says the clothes I got off her were 3 weeks prior, if not longer. I haven't cut my chest nowhere. It would have been a little spot on my chest. "Nothing to do with jumping over gardens?" says David. "I'd have a scar or a mark. They took pictures, head to toe. You'll see for yourself there's no cuts, no marks, nothing," says Thomas Cashman. "Did you trust her?" says David. "I was sleeping with her. It was just a bit of fun, which I shouldn't have been having. She was someone I was trying to distance myself from. I'd been having an affair behind my missus's back for too long," says Thomas Cashman. "Head in your hands. I've done Joey. Does that sound familiar, Mr. Cashman?" says David. "She says I went round and done Joey. In another interview, she says I didn't hear Joey, I heard Nee," says Thomas Cashman. He continues to say, on another occasion, she goes, "I heard him say Joey Nee. It's a lie. It's a blatant lie. The proof's there," says Thomas Cashman. "She's trying to stitch you up," says David. "That's exactly what she's doing," says Thomas Cashman. David asked Thomas Cashman to tell the jury where he used to live. Thomas Cashman says, I lived in Runcorn. Before I lived in Runcorn, I lived in Liverpool city centre. I lived in Penshaw Close about 12 years ago. You've made a big play about cannabis, haven't you? Says David. I sell cannabis, says Thomas Cashman. Tell us who you buy cannabis from, says David. I buy them from different people, says Thomas Cashman. Name them, says David. I won't name my friends who I get cannabis from, says Thomas Cashman. Who do you sell cannabis to, says David. I sell them to people round my area, my friends I grow up with, says Thomas Cashman. There were 5 or 6 you said, says David. I'm not telling you, says Thomas Cashman. Why not, says David. 'Cause then they'll go and get arrested, says Thomas Cashman. Tell us the names, Mr. Cashman, says David. I'm not going to say who I supply my cannabis to. I wouldn't do that, says Thomas Cashman. You're on trial for murder. 12 people behind me. Tell us, says David. At this point, the judge interrupts and says, He's answered that now, Mr. McLaren. David continues to ask, When did you decide to tell the truth? Thomas Cashman replies, I've always told the truth. In interview, did you tell the truth? Asked David. I gave a prepared statement, says Thomas Cashman. You were asked a lot of questions, says David. I was asked a lot of questions, says Thomas Cashman. Mr. Cashman, what is your defence to this case? Says David. Meaning what? Says Thomas Cashman. David says he is asking Thomas Cashman to clarify where he was at the time of the shooting. Thomas Cashman says, At my friend's house, Craig's. Do you know what the word alibi means? Says David. Whereabout we was, basically, says Thomas Cashman. Did you tell the police where you were? Says David. No, says Thomas Cashman. Did they ask? Says David. I went no comment. I didn't tell the police nothing, says Thomas Cashman. You're being interviewed about a little kid being shot. Where were you? Help us out, says David. I told the police it wasn't me who did it, and I have no problem with people. I wanted to give a prepared statement just so they know it was not me, says Thomas Cashman. Are you trying to fit your case to the evidence that's been put before this court? Says David. What I'm saying is the whole truth. I understand you've got a job to do, Mr. McLaughlin, and I accept that. I respect that. But the police have got it all wrong. It's not true. It's all wrong. Every bit of it, says Thomas Cashman. They're just coincidences, says David. Somebody who said they're going to ruin my life has gone to the police and said this, says Thomas Cashman. David asks, Would you deal drugs from Grenadier Drive? I would sometimes leave money in there. I would never take large amounts of cannabis there, as it's my family home, says Thomas Cashman. David then asks about CCTV cameras being removed from his home. I removed the recorder from it because Nicky McHale's house got raided for drugs. They took all my money and drugs from there, and I got paranoid they might come to my house. I removed my recorder and my cameras. I didn't want to get caught for selling drugs. I sell drugs on a high level. David then asks if he sold drugs from Grenadier Drive. Thomas Cashman replies and says, Not from Grenadier Drive. I'm going back and forth. I was just being a bit cautious. I found out Nicky's had been raided for drugs. That was my stash house. I got a bit paranoid and removed my recorder from my house. It was me removing my CCTV, yeah. I removed the CCTV. David says, Is being a cannabis dealer at your level a tough business? No, because it's everyone I know from my own area and where I've grown up. It's a bit boring, to be honest, says Thomas Cashman. It's a tough place, Dopecot, says David. Dovecot, Hoyton, yeah. It's just somewhere I grew up, so I'm used to being around there, says Thomas Cashman. Does Kaylee Ann Sweeney know what you do for a living? Says David. I never tell her nothing about what I'm doing. She knows I was selling a bit of weed at one stage. I tried to turn my life around by starting a car business. She was starting her own business. I'd keep her out of it, says Thomas Cashman. Did she see big stacks of cash? Says David. No. She'd see me paying the bills. Maybe buying the kids' clothes, says Thomas Cashman. She wasn't aware what level you were operating at, says David. No, says Thomas Cashman. How long have you been doing it for? Says David. I've sold cannabis off and on since I was young. I only started properly when I moved back to Liverpool ways. About 2 years it's been. At first, starting off, I was getting it all going. I was going to my people who want a bit. From then, I started to when I finished. It's all going higher and higher, says Thomas Cashman. She had no idea what you were up to, says David. She would have had suspicions. She never asked me. I never told her, says Thomas Cashman. It wasn't just a summer job in August 2022, says David. I'd been selling cannabis for a while. Yeah, says Thomas Cashman. Would you use people? Says David. In what way? Asked Thomas Cashman. Colleen Cashman, your sister, did you use her? Asked David. I used the house. I didn't use Colleen Cashman. She was with an ex-police officer. She's a bit strict because of the way she is with him, says Thomas Cashman. You still go round and sell gear from her house, says David. She must have had suspicions, says Thomas Cashman. Kaylee's got suspicions. Colleen's got suspicions, says David. Colleen might have known. She's not stupid. She knew what I was doing, says Thomas Cashman. Kevin Dunn, your brother, was he a drug dealer? Asked David. No, he lived with his partner while my friend sold drugs from his house, says Thomas Cashman. Did you supply the friends? Asked David. Yes, I did, says Thomas Cashman. Did he know? Asked David. He's not stupid. He knew I was giving the lads drugs. He warned me not to do it. If I do it, he'd end up giving me a beating. He's my older brother. I did it behind his back because he was never home and my friends lived in the house, says Thomas Cashman. Craig Brine, tell the jury what his nickname is, says David. His name's Craig, says Thomas Cashman. Coyley, says David. That's something someone else refers to him as, says Thomas Cashman. Nicky McHale, did you use him? Says David. I used his house. I supplied him with cannabis, says Thomas Cashman. David then asked Thomas Cashman of Mr. McHale's whereabouts at about 4 p.m. on August the 22nd. David reads from Cashman's defence statement, and in the document setting out the defence's response to the prosecution case, which is submitted ahead of the criminal trials. The statement said, Cashman said in the statement, took drugs to Mr. McHale. Thomas Cashman responds and says, I never said in my defence statement I left them with Nicky McHale's. I took them to Nicky McHale's, says Thomas Cashman. Have you been caught out there? Says David. By what? Says Thomas Cashman. If I show you something on the screen now. And then at this point, David pulls up a selfie of Mr. McHale and another woman, and they were both probably an elderly age. Thomas Cashman responds to this and says, I did not speak to Nicky when I went round. I've got my own key for his house. I just let myself in, says Thomas Cashman. That's just a small mistake, says David. Yes, it is, says Thomas Cashman. It's not a question of being caught out, says David. It's not, says Thomas Cashman. David continues reading from the defence statement. He then turns to a section concerning the drug debt to Russell. David says, no need to mention 25 grand. Yeah, says Thomas Cashman. Are you trying to fit your defence to the evidence we've put forward? Says David. No, says Thomas Cashman. You accept you're a drug dealer, says David. Yeah, I do, says Thomas Cashman. Do drug dealers use things like this? Says David. He then holds up a mobile phone. Thomas Cashman says, drug dealers do use things like this. David says, were you using a phone? I had an old iPhone that broke a couple of days beforehand. I've always sold cannabis to people I've been close to. I'd use my missus's phone to phone my friends, says Thomas Cashman. You're making $3 to $5 grand here, says David. I would have gone and got a phone. Just at that time I was using my missus's phone, says Thomas Cashman. It wasn't the case that not having a mobile phone on purpose so no one could trace your movements, says David. No, I never had a phone for a couple of days before the 22nd as well, says Thomas Cashman. The jury are shown Cashman's custody picture and also a picture of his van. They're also shown CCTV stills of him and Mrs. Sweeney in Runcorn on their chill break. David asks, what tracksuit bottoms are those, Mr. Cashman? They're Monterey tracksuit bottoms, says Cashman. Thomas Cashman says he either got them from JD or Foot Asylum. Where are they? Asks David. I'm not sure, says Thomas Cashman. You've heard the evidence. Police have checked the addresses linked to you, says David. You're suggesting that I'm the gunman, which I'm not. You're suggesting I've done this shooting in the pants I haven't seen in 2 days later. The unnamed witness is suggesting she got rid of the pants for me. I'm seen with the tracksuit bottoms on. If she's got rid of my tracksuit bottoms, why have I got them on 2 days later? Would I be wearing the same tracksuit bottoms 2 days later? Says Thomas Cashman. Tell us where they are then, says David. That is what I don't know. They're somewhere. I stay in Grenadier Drive. I stay in Runcorn. I stay in the flat in Baycliffe. Just before this, I went on a little canal boat with John. Them pants are somewhere. I haven't got rid of them. There's proof here. I've got them on 2 days later. She's saying she got rid of them pants for me. 2 days later, here I am with the pants on with my girlfriend going shopping. I did not do this. I hope you all look at it and say who's going to commit a serious offence and put them pants back on. It's untrue. I didn't do it, and my pants are somewhere, says Thomas Cashman. Thomas Cashman continues to say, everybody wears them tracksuit bottoms and them trainees I wear. Who? Says David. Everybody in the whole of Liverpool. When something comes out, everyone goes mad about it. Everyone's wearing Monterey. It's just what happens over the years and years, says Thomas Cashman. Who? Asks David. Loads of people wear them tracksuit bottoms. They're common. It's like years ago when Lacoste came out, Berghaus came out, everyone went mad about Monterey. As the woman said, they've got the best-selling pants. Yours have gone, says David. Mine are somewhere. I don't know at the moment where they are, says Thomas Cashman. David then asks Cashman about Joseph Nee. David says, is he a good mate of yours? He's a good mate. I've never had a problem with him, says Thomas Cashman. Are you always out together? Says David. No, I wouldn't say he was my best mate. We drive around on the motorbike, talk about cars and bikes, like I did the day before this happened. Joseph put it in his own statement saying that. I'm his mate. He said he's got no problems with me. David then asks, can he get to Ancoat Road by chance? It's Dovecot. It's on the back of Dovecot shops, says Thomas Cashman. David then asks him why he was knocking around in 5 or 6 vehicles rather than the one vehicle. David suggests a little kid had been shot dead and you knew you had something to do with it. I had nothing whatsoever to do with it, says Thomas Cashman. Did you want to shoot Joseph Nee? Says David. Why would I want to shoot my friend? You can tell the jury why I would want to shoot my friend, says Thomas Cashman. Cashman is then asked if he had Nee's phone number in his phone. Cashman says, no, Joseph Nee's number was not in my phone. I've got loads of friends, but I don't have all their numbers in my phone. David then asks, do you see your mate Joey Nee's van on Finch Lane? No, I didn't. I wasn't paying attention. It was just a van, says Thomas Cashman. CCTV is then shown of Cashman arriving back at Mab Lane. Then his van travelling down Finch Road. Thomas Cashman says to this, you're saying that's got a view, but it's just a main road. You were looking for Joseph Nee's van, says David. No, I was just going to collect my money with a friend, says Thomas Cashman. Is it your little mate, says David. I called him my little mate because they're in their 20s, they're only young, says Thomas Cashman. I don't suppose you're willing to give us his name, says David. No, says Thomas Cashman. Thomas Cashman is then shown footage of Joseph Nee's van leaving that area. You had no idea, says David. I didn't know, says Thomas Cashman. Thomas Cashman is then seen speaking to a man the jury had earlier been told is Ben Russell. David asks Cashman to name him. Thomas Cashman says no. David said, is it Ben Russell? Yous know who it is. That's who yous got down for him as yes, says Thomas Cashman. It is, isn't it? Says David. I'm not too sure, I can't remember, says Thomas Cashman. Who is Ben Russell in connection with the unnamed witness? Asks David. He's my mate, says Thomas Cashman. Thomas Cashman then confirms that that's Paul Russell's brother. Thomas Cashman says he was on the Snowbury Road and he was picking up some cannabis. Nothing else to do with a shooting, says David. No, it was not, says Thomas Cashman. At this point, Thomas Cashman is shown a footage of him at the corner of Finch Lane and Berryford Road. David asks, was the weather bad? Thomas Cashman says, yeah, as you can see off the CCTV. Did you need a mask on your face as well? Asked David. I zipped my jacket up all the way up and pulled the strings so the rain doesn't go onto the back of my neck, like any person would do. People walk round like that anyways when it's raining. Some people wear neck warmers. Some people wear COVID face masks, says Thomas Cashman. You weren't trying to hide your face, says David. No, it was raining, says Thomas Cashman. What did you have in your pockets? Asked David. I had cannabis, says Thomas Cashman. Anything else? Asked David. No, nothing whatsoever, says Thomas Cashman. Where are you looking? Asked David. I'm looking right at my brother's, says Thomas Cashman. Your brother's there on the pavement. As soon as I see him, I turn around immediately, says Thomas Cashman. Are you trying to fit your case to the evidence? Says David. I've told you that before, you've even served it, says Thomas Cashman. David then moves on to the journey in the van. Thomas Cashman says to this, you say I'm in this van, but I'm 98% sure I'm not. I walked back round Princess Drive. I'm not 100% sure, but when I looked at it, I thought, I'm not in that van. They've got it all wrong here, says Thomas Cashman. Thomas Cashman then agrees he's wearing the night trainers, a Monterey tracksuit and a cap walking back to his sister's address on the afternoon on August 22nd. David says, do you remember how long you stayed in your sister's for? On that day, my sister was upset. She'd been arguing with her boyfriend over me having people there. When I went in, my sister was a bit upset. I'm not sure how long, but I said I'll stop having people round. She was getting a hard time off her boyfriend, and she told me to pack it in, says Thomas Cashman. Thomas Cashman then said he went to his brother's house. He said he was unable to tell his friends about the weed he had been hoping to bring round, as his brother was also there. Thomas Cashman said, I had a spliff and a catch-up. I went in there and had a general conversation with them. I've left my brother's house then. The lads was waiting for something to arrive. When I went round, they was all in the living room. My brother was in the living room. I just built myself a spliff and had a chat with them and got off, says Thomas Cashman. David then asked Thomas Cashman why his van was seen on Kingsheath Avenue. I don't know exactly whereabouts I was going. I might have went to my mates on Fincham or Finch Lane. You're going directly past Timmy Naylor's house, says David. It's the main road. It's Finch Lane. It's just a route I'd take every day, says Thomas Cashman. You're not checking for Joey Nee, says David. I'm not checking for Joey Nee whatsoever, no, says Thomas Cashman. David then asked Thomas Cashman about his route. Thomas Cashman says to this, I could have went down Princess Drive. I don't know why. I can't remember. I can't remember what I was doing that day. If I was to ask you what you were doing on August the 22nd, could you explain I was doing this and that? I was doing general stuff every day, what I always do. I don't think anyone could. I go close to Timmy's, but it's also my brother's. Timmy Naylor just happened to live on Finch Lane, says Thomas Cashman. Why did you get changed? Asked David. Because I was soaked. It was torrential rain. It was pissing it down. I went into my sister's and got changed. I went to collect some money first. I came back to my sister's and collected a bit of cannabis. I went to Nicky McHale's, says Thomas Cashman. David asks if he would transport cannabis in his car. Thomas Cashman says to this, if I'm walking, if the police come, I can just run away from them. I don't mind driving round with money. I'm okay with small bits of cannabis. Personal bits of cannabis, says Thomas Cashman. Big bits of cannabis? You put in your trackie? Says David. I put on my trackie because it was torrential rain. I would have put my polly in my pocket. I'd only drop off kilos of pollen if it's local around my area. If it's a kilo of skunk, I'd walk around with it in a carrier bag or get someone to collect it, says Thomas Cashman. Thomas Cashman then says his journeys were nothing whatsoever to do with Joey Nee. He goes on to say, Joey Nee's my friend. I don't have no reason to look for Joey Nee. Can you tell the jury this is the reason? I was not looking for Joey Nee that day. I wasn't thinking of Joey Nee at all that day, says Thomas Cashman. At this point there's a break in the prosecution doing the cross-examination, so I'm going to leave this at part 1